The sun is going to disappear for 24 hours. We're all screwed if that happens. However, it is not the end of the world, because there are other stars out there that could save us. But which ones? Welcome back, everyone. Here, we'll try to answer the great questions of the universe and beyond. Today we're answering a very important question. What would happen if the sun disappeared for 24 hours? Let's begin. If the sun were to disappear tomorrow, there would be no dramatic event in the sky. It will just vanish without a trace. There would be no explosion or bright flash. It would just cease to exist. For people on Earth, there would be no immediate indication that anything had happened. They would look up in the sky and see nothing where the sun should be. But otherwise everything would seem normal. Even our most sophisticated instruments would not detect any change. This is because the solar system would continue moving along its orbit as usual. The only thing different would be that the sun was gone. After an hour or so, the first noticeable effect would occur. People around the globe would notice that the temperature was dropping rapidly, and it was becoming dark like nighttime. In fact, it would be much colder than normal winter nights. According to NASA, the temperature on Earth would drop by about 18 degrees Celsius or about 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And these conditions would get even worse as time went on. Within 24 hours, the entire planet would be plunged into darkness as the Earth's orbit took it away from the sun's life-giving rays. As the temperature continued to plummet, animals began to die. Plants would also begin to die. All forms of life would begin to collapse. Oceans would freeze over. Water vapor would condense in the atmosphere and fall as rain, snow, and sleet. Within 3 days, the entire planet would be buried under several feet of frozen precipitation. By the end of the week, the Earth's surface would be a solid sheet of ice. But wait a minute, what actually happened to the sun? Did it explode? Well, no, not really. It's more likely that the sun would simply vanish without a trace. Now you might be asking yourself, how can a star just disappear? Well, it's possible. Stars are born when giant clouds of gas and dust collapse in on themselves. Gravity pulls the material together until it forms a ball of hot plasma. When the core of the ball reaches a critical temperature and pressure, nuclear fusion begins. Hydrogen atoms are converted into helium, releasing tremendous amounts of energy. That's why you can see stars shining in the night sky. They ray just balls of hot gas giving off light and heat as they burn through their hydrogen fuel. However, stars aren't just balls of gas. They have powerful magnetic fields that extend far beyond their surfaces. These magnetic fields can trap charged particles of gas, creating structures known as coronal mass ejections or CMEs. CMEs are constantly shooting out from the sun, carrying with them billions of tons of matter. Some CMEs are aimed at Earth, and they cause auroras when they hit our atmosphere. Others miss the Earth completely and head out into deep space. Now here's where things get interesting. While most CMEs dissipate harmlessly in the vastness of space, some of them can collide with other objects, such as planets or asteroids. When this happens, the CME can trigger a massive explosion. The energy released in these explosions is often enough to blow the object that triggered the CME completely apart. So what would happen if a CME hit the sun? Well, if a CME struck the sun at just the right angle, it could deliver a powerful enough blow to knock the sun off its course. If the sun were to veer even slightly out of its path around the Milky Way galaxy, it could eventually escape the gravitational pull of the galaxy and fly off into intergalactic space. Now, this isn't likely to happen anytime soon. The sun is held tightly in the Milky Way's gravitational grasp, and it would take a lot of energy to dislodge it. However, it is theoretically possible that a large enough CME could do the trick. So let's say that a CME did strike the sun and knock it out of orbit. What would happen next? Well, the sun would continue flying through space for a while, but eventually it would run out of hydrogen fuel and go out like a dying ember. The solar system would continue moving forward, but there would be no light or heat to keep the planets warm. The entire solar system would be plunged into an ice age that would last for millions of years. However, all hope is not lost. there are other stars in the universe that could potentially save us if the sun disappeared for 24 hours. The first option is Alpha Centauri, the closest star to our sun. Alpha Centauri is actually a triple star system located just 4.4 light years away from Earth. The brightest of the three stars is Alpha Centauri A, which is very similar to our sun. If Alpha Centauri A were to suddenly become active and start emitting an enormous amount of light and heat, its radiation could potentially warm the Earth and prevent an ice age. Unfortunately, this is highly unlikely to happen. Alpha Centauri A is a relatively small star, and it would take millions of years for it to evolve into a big, bright star that could save us. Another option is to find a rogue star. Rogue stars are stars that have been ejected from their planetary systems and are now wandering the galaxy alone. There are thought to be millions of rogue stars in the Milky Way, and some of them could potentially be in the solar system right now. If we could find one of these rogue stars and somehow convince it to stick around for a few years, it could provide the light and heat necessary to save the Earth. However, finding a rogue star in time would be extremely difficult. Rogue stars are incredibly hard to detect, and even if we did spot one, there's no guarantee that it would agree to stay in our solar system. Finally, we could try to create our own artificial sun. If we could create a star, it would give us the light and heat we need to survive. However, creating a star is no easy feat. It would require a tremendous amount of energy and matter. Fortunately, scientists are already working on ways to create miniature stars on Earth. If their research is successful, we may one day have our own artificial sun to keep us warm. As you can see, there are a few options available if the sun disappeared for 24 hours. However, none of them are easy. It would take a lot of work to harness the power of Alpha Centauri, find a rogue star, or create an artificial sun. But if we could do any of these things, we could potentially save the Earth and all of its inhabitants. What would happen if the sun disappeared for 24 hours? You might think that it wouldn't make any difference since the sun would just pop back up the next day. But you'd be wrong. In fact, the entire solar system could collapse if the sun disappeared for just 24 hours. The good news is that there are other stars out there that could save us if this ever happened. But which ones? We've already talked about Alpha Centauri, the closest star to our sun. But what about Proxima Centauri? This is a red dwarf star that's even closer to Earth than Alpha Centauri. However, it's not a good candidate for replacing the sun. That's because Proxima Centauri is much smaller and cooler than our sun. Its light is dimmer, and its gravity is weaker, so it wouldn't be able to keep the Earth warm or maintain its orbit around the sun. What about Sirius? This is the brightest star in the night sky, but it's also much bigger and hotter than our sun, so it wouldn't be suitable for replacing the sun either. Then there's Betelgeuse. This is a red hypergent almost 700 light-years away. It's much larger than our sun, but it's also nearing the end of its life. In about 1 million years, Betelgeuse will go supernova, which means that it will explode and disappear. So we can rule that one out, too. That leaves us with only a few options. One possibility is to find a rogue star like I mentioned before. However, finding one of these stars in time would be extremely difficult. Another option is to use the James Webb Space Telescope to focus sunlight onto the Earth. This is probably the most feasible option, but it would only work for a few months. Eventually, the energy from the reflected sunlight would run out, and we'd be plunged into darkness once again. This is why it's so important that we don't take the sun for granted. It's a massive ball of burning plasma that keeps our planet alive and thriving. Without it, we would freeze to death within hours. So next time you look up at the sun, remember just how lucky we are to have it. What would happen if the sun disappeared for 24 hours? Well, for starters, your Instagram feed would be missing a few key elements. No more beautiful sunrise pics or sunset OOTDs. But seriously, if the sun went missing for a whole day, we'd all be in trouble. Temperatures would plummet, crops would wither and die. Global panic would ensue. So count yourself lucky you made it through another day on planet Earth. And here's to hoping the sun doesn't take a vacation anytime soon. Thanks for watching. See you next time.